Welcome, and I have to say I'm really delighted to be here. This is my second time here at Inkai, a second time for a base of the pyramid type event, and I am particularly pleased to thank Stu Hart and Ted and the other organizers, not just the organizers, but those that have really been leading the work on the base of the pyramid. Now, a lot of you heard, in fact, on the presentations you heard this morning, there's a real focus on the business case for sustainability, the business case for alleviating poverty. What I want to do in the next 30 minutes is give you a perspective that doesn't replace the business case, but adds another dimension. I hope you'll be able to see these slides somewhat in the dark. Can you guys see that? You can see it okay? So first I want to tell you a little bit a personal journey of mine. I spent the last 15 years really working on the business case for sustainability. And progressively, with every book, starting about 15 years ago, I've tried to show how companies can do good and do well, and to make a rigorous argument that in the best and highest business school would be seen as credible and compelling. But at the same time, and I think we've heard about this from Ted, and we've heard this from some of the other speakers, we're starting to see storm clouds on the horizon in how we've proceeded. We are starting to see that many of the businesses, not just in the base of the pyramid, but many sustainable projects get stuck in pilot mode. Do you know what I mean by this? Pilot mode, it stays in a small scale. We see that many employees are feeling discouraged about working on sustainability projects, or they're not inspired. We see that CEOs are saying that they find that the business case for sustainability is less strong today than it was 3-4 years ago. So some of these surveys are coming from these big companies like Accenture, Deloitte, McKinsey, and others that are doing surveys of thousands of executives in 40 countries or more. So what I'm saying to you is not a North American perspective. This is really a global perspective. The sense that business doesn't feel that sustainability is delivering the financial value promise that it thought it was going to get. On the other hand, we also know that the big global and local problems that business is addressing, whether it's alleviating poverty or dealing with environmental challenges, is not going fast enough. So a lot of it falls into what we heard Stu Hart call this morning type 1 strategies, greening strategies that tend to be incremental and are focused on making step improvements in the existing system, but they're not the kind of disruptive solution types initiatives that can really move us in another direction, not just from doing less harm, but to the net positive of beyond greening. So in the last few years, I've worked on a completely different approach. I really want to say that this term flourishing enterprise, and I must say I don't know exactly how it translates, how flourishing enterprise translates compared to sustainability or sustainable development. But these 3 first books of mine were about the business case for sustainability, and flourishing enterprise is, as you will see, really something quite different. So one of the things we know at work, and I had lots of English text, but I thought I would put some pictures in the last minute. You may or may not agree with how these pictures represent, but I think you get the idea, right? That at work, we know from surveys that people feel disconnected. They feel disengaged from work. They don't feel that they are treated as human beings at work. They often feel that they are treated in what we call fungible resources. Like in a business, you can be moved from here to there, and then you need to be moved over there, you know, depending on the reorganization of the company, productivity goals, and so on. People don't feel that their personal values line up with the values of the organization. People spend so much of the time at work and they feel stressed, they feel overwhelmed, they feel that they are having to multitask. They don't get the opportunity to work on things that are really important for them. Now this is becoming something more and more important in the general discussion, and certainly in organizational development, and has been for a very long time. We've talked about not just organizational effectiveness, but also how organizations can unleash the human potential, that being in the field of organizational development. But in the area of sustainability, we have not seen a lot of attention to personal well-being. So if you take, for example, the work of Michael Porter on shared value, there's no mention at any point of whether people feel good about themselves. People have a sense of fulfillment. People are engaged. People can be authentic at work. It's really a strategy approach where you're looking at the relationship between an organization and its environment, the competitive dynamics at play. So flourishing really begins with this idea that we have to pay attention to personal flourishing. Personal flourishing not only of ourselves as employees, as customers, as partners, as members of local communities. So paying attention to this. But the question is, where does flourishing come from? And so what I'm going to show you here, this definition, is coming from a MIT study in 1999, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, published in 1999 by Ian Mitroff and Elizabeth Denton. They interviewed 100+ executives to try to get at what does personal flourishing, personal well-being really mean. And this is what it came to. It came to this idea that it's about the basic feeling of being connected with one's complete self, others, and the world. So think about this for yourself. Each of you here, do you feel at work, are you able to feel connected to your life purpose, if you have one? If you're very young, there's no expectation. Where is Megan? There's no expectation to have a understanding of life purpose when you're very young. But as you move into the adult working world, you know, does what you do connect to what you like to do, to what you want to do? Do you feel that your own values that are important to you are values that you can bring into the workplace? Do you feel like your work-life balance is one that works for you in the long term? And the reason for asking these questions is because if we want to get to a flourishing world, doesn't it make sense to start with flourishing individuals? So we're here at this conference on the base of the pyramid about the role of business in helping to support a flourishing world. Is it not important that we pay attention to the personal well-being of the employees in all these ventures, in all these organizations, as well as customers, partners, and others, that we take care of their needs, not just physical needs, not just security needs, the economic needs that we see at the base of the pyramid. But we have to have this mental model, I would think, and this is a conversation I'd like to talk more with the BOP specialists. But you know, we often have Maslow's pyramid in mind, and we think that at the base of the pyramid, all people want is security and food and shelter, that sort of thing. But are we not doing a disservice, or are we not actually underestimating the true human potential at the base of the pyramid, where a desire to be treated as a human being, to be able to have not just physical health, but emotional health, mental health, and even spiritual health. How important is that? So, one of the differences between flourishing world, flourishing enterprise, and sustainability is something that I think Stu Hart has done a strong job, and Ted and his colleagues have done a good job on for a long time, in distinguishing between greening and beyond greening. So this notion of flourishing, a flourishing world and flourishing business, is very much the beyond greening concept. It's the idea that we have to go beyond incremental change to disruptive innovation, and we have to go from reducing harm to having a net positive impact, and that's simply because that's the world we live in today. We're not going to make a difference on the big sustainability challenges we face by incrementally extending. This is the Schumpeter idea that Stu Hart, for those of you who heard him, spoke about this morning. But again, paying attention to personal well-being is where I want to put a little bit more attention. Interestingly enough, Peter Drucker wrote about this over half a century ago. He said, society needs a return to spiritual values, not to offset the material, but to make it fully productive. Now, when we talk about being connected, do you remember that definition I gave you? The definition of being connected to your personal self, others in the world. At the heart of that is spiritual well-being. And I just want to share a short story I had with a MIT social scientist, Peter Senge, a couple of years ago. And I was talking to him about flourishing, and I said, you know, flourishing, you have to have all these elements: physical health, emotional health, mental health, spiritual health. And he said, Chris, you're not ambitious enough for the spiritual piece here. That the foundation of all other well-being is that you have inner well-being, that you're taking care of this inner dimension. Now, you know, for some, that has to do with their relationship with God, and for those for whom God plays that role, that's precisely what they should be or can be building on. For others, it may not be a religious experience, but it's still, they have some practices, they have something in their life that allows them to have this strong inner well-being. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of companies that may surprise you, who are, I think, flourishing companies in the sense I'm talking about. This particular company, Schuberg Philis, is a $70+ million sales company from Holland. It's a company of engineers. And they have, they've been around now for a great many years with profits that are 3 times the information technology industry average, and customer satisfaction rates that are at the highest of the industry. This company is founded on this idea of personal well-being, personal flourishing. I think that was exactly a symbol to emphasize this point. So this is the company. This is, if you can read it, this is right from their website. This is one of the core principles that they have the company built on. Their core principle is, the principle is love. And they say, the fully human organization, we have the desire for each person to flourish. We are all equal and unique. We see the whole human being as a colleague, as a parent, as a friend. When we connect at the deep level, wonderful things become possible. Does that sound like most business organizations you know, that would talk about love and deep connectedness and talking about friends? They actually have a practice of holding meetings at the end of every day around the kitchen table, like a family would do. Again, an extremely successful company. They came a few months ago to Cleveland. You see, I was interviewing them. This is the CEO. This is the CEO of the company and the founder of the company who came to talk about what his company was doing. But it's not only IT companies. It's not only the special. Here's another company, General Mills, which is almost 140 years old. Food production company. It used to be General Flour. they have made a big attempt to create a culture where people can practice mindfulness, meditation, yoga, nutritional programs, and it's not just programmatic. In other words, this is really something that people are able to do. This is an example of a meditation room at the company. And of course, here in Latin America, a company that brilliantly illustrates this idea is Natura, whose stated purpose, is to promote being well. Now, being well, they define. So Natura, the company, defines being well as the empathetic, successful, and gratifying relationship of a person with others, with nature, and the whole. And you see, why are we finding a lot of common language here? Because these are not new ideas. In fact, this language was taken from a Greek philosopher, Plotinus, who influenced the founder of Natura. That this is the way that we should all lead our lives in order to lead a fulfilling life. This is a notion that Aristotle advanced as well with his concept of eudaimonia. So here's the hypothesis, okay? And I invite you to make the connection to the base of the pyramid, because I haven't made yet the explicit connection to the base of the pyramid. The hypothesis is that people who experience a greater sense of connectedness to self, others, and the world are more likely to care for others in future generations. Now, I want to give you a quick understanding of why that might be so. So it comes because of what Peter Senge calls mental models. We hold mental models in today's world. The last 300 years of science, industry, enlightenment have led us to have this belief that we are separate from each other, separate and selfish, okay? So you see here a picture, I think this must be taken Wall Street early in the morning. They don't look very happy, do they? Walking down here. But, you know, we also view success as being, you know, more income, more things. GDP is what defines, the gross domestic product is the measure of success of a country. It requires industry activity that pollutes and harms the environment, and we treat nature, including animals and plants, as just a resource for us. If you contrast that with a view of connectedness, a mental model of connectedness is very different. The mental model of connectedness has people connected to each other and caring. So instead of separate and selfish, we become caring and connected. But then the question is, well, where does it become? I mean, it's very nice to show these pictures here, but what is it that causes us to be on the left part of this visual instead of the right part? So we have to go one layer deeper now. I want to take you into the paradigms of science. Now, traditional science has reinforced this notion of separateness at 3 levels. I want to show you at the quantum level, at the atom quantum level, at the biological level, and cosmological level. So at the quantum level, we learn in school very young that the building blocks, that this table, this chair, that ourselves, we are built from atoms, and the atoms have protons and neutrons and electrons, and then now we know that there are finer particles, but ultimately that these are all small, like billiard balls, that are functioning according to laws and forces, in particular the gravity, electromagnetic, strong nuclear and weak nuclear forces. So we live in a rather cold universe of things separated by empty space. And at the macro level, at the biological level, it's the same thing. I'm me. You are you. We are separate. We are physically separate, but we are also bounded selves. Okay? And at the cosmological level, we've often understood that, you know, we have these stars and planets separated by empty space. We know that from the new cosmology that that's not true, that there's an enormous amount in space that we can't account for, that we can't see. That's why it's called dark matter. But that influences the forces of evolution of bodies in space. Now, if you compare that to an emerging paradigm in science, it's one of connectedness, connectedness at the quantum level. So physicists are saying now that when you get to the finest level of understanding of the physical world, that it's not particles, it's fields, fields of energy. And that all things are actually what are called just manifestations of this energy field. So that when we say we are connected, it's not just a metaphor. We are actually connected by these energy fields. And at the biological level, we are learning the hard way on this small planet that we are more deeply connected than we thought, that we can't do things as a species without taking into account the impact on other species and flora and fauna and the ecologies of the world. And finally, at the cosmological level, same thing. We are starting to learn that the world is, that the universe is, has properties that the physicists and cosmologists call quantum entanglement and coherence across distance. Now, you may be wondering, why are you here, especially on a bit of a hot day, getting this science lesson? What does this have to do with base of the pyramid? Well, I want to suggest to you that we need to understand these paradigms, these mental models that we have about the world. If we're going to get to a place of seeing each other as deeply connected, not just metaphorically, but that we are physically deeply connected to each other in physical terms, but also in dynamic existential terms. We are deeply connected to each other, and that caring is an essential property of what it means to be human. Also, there's been new work in consciousness research. So it used to be that consciousness was something that happened in the brain, and it was based on the five senses: our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our ears, and our touch, which gave information that was then processed with electrical signals in the brain to give us the information that we have in our consciousness. And it was because of 100 billion neurons that we somehow generated consciousness. So in this model, consciousness is just all in the brain. Well, the new work in consciousness research says something very interesting. It says consciousness is not coming from inside our brain. In fact, that there are much finer structures inside the brain. These lattices, these microtubule lattices that are able to pick up quantum information from the world around us. And that our consciousness may not be just something that we generate, but that we tap into, and that there is such a thing as a universal consciousness. Now, these are not particularly new ideas. The idea of deep consciousness is an ancient intuition. So William James had a transmission theory of consciousness. He postulated this very idea over 100 years ago in his lectures in 1899. Carl Jung talked about the psyche is not a product of the brain, it's part of the generative, creative principles of the cosmos. And Erwin Schrödinger talked about there being only one mind. But more importantly, I think if we go back to a lot of the early religious traditions, they all saw, most of them saw, a unified field from which all manifest reality came. So, part of what we need to do to become very practical is to start thinking about changing who we are being, changing who leaders are being, changing how we see the world, so that when we choose to do something in the base of the pyramid or anywhere else, we're doing it not just because of the business case, but because we have a profound appreciation for our connectedness to the world around us. And we care for this world because it is us. We are it. So this is towards my last slides. The idea is, could reflective practices help tune into the consciousness of connectedness? So, if we can just keep our five senses quiet for a little bit, especially our rational thinking, and do things, whether it's music or art or gardening or meditation or being with friends in nature, may allow you the opportunity to tap into this connectedness in the universe. And more people in business are starting to adopt some kind of reflective practices. For some, it's journaling, it's 3 minutes of silence before a meeting, it's going for a break outside in nature at some point in the day. But the point is that they're taking care of this inner well-being to reconnect to what's important. So here is my last slide and this overall summary of what I'm sharing with you today. The overall idea is that reflective practices can create a sense of awareness of connectedness. Reflective practices, again, can be prayer. You know, your prayer to your God leads you to a greater awareness of connectedness, which in turn leads to greater caring for self, others in the world. It supports a business agenda of flourishing, which then allows you to create more value creation opportunities, and that in turn feeds a greater awareness of connectedness. So you get into a virtual cycle to do that, but it all starts with taking care of your inner well-being, and in your organizations, taking care of your people. Thank you.